The Art of Criticism, Part 1, Swimming Lessons. A few years ago, my good friend and colleague Ben Rowley lent me a copy of Guy Sherwin's DVD Optical Sound Films 1971 to 2007. We just saw an extract from one of the films a moment ago. The DVD comes with a book that provides a fascinating insight into Sherwin's work. Particularly interesting for me was one sentence that appears in the introduction. Quote, "What links all the films is the physical correspondence between sound and image. In many of the films, sounds are produced directly by the images that we are seeing." That is, optical sound film technology encodes sound in a visual form. You don't normally see this, of course. The optical soundtrack is a kind of waveform or horizontal pattern of black and grey stripes printed down one edge of the film strip. So the soundtrack is in fact an image, but it's located outside of the picture frame, so you don't see it when the film's projected. What Sherwin does is to put this relationship between sound and image on display, so that the images creating the sounds we hear can also be seen on screen. In this way, his films exploit and explore what he terms, quote, "this accident of technological synesthesia." When it was time to give the DVD back, I decided that I wanted to make an illegal copy of it. But then I had second thoughts. Not because I was particularly worried about committing an act of piracy, but rather because it would take ages to photocopy the book. And would I really want the DVD without the book to explain what I was looking at and listening to? Deprived of the supplement of the written word, I was worried that the films would no longer make sense, that I wouldn't get what was happening, and that I wouldn't understand the ideas behind the films, and that this would impact on my enjoyment of the films themselves. That is, without the book, the conceptual dimension would be lost. This then reminded me of a longer-standing anxiety that I'd nursed about the synesthetic effects generated by optical sound synthesis. In his beautiful and ingenious 1971 film Synchrony, the animator Norman McLaren created synthetic sounds by painting simple graphic patterns onto strips of card. These cards were photographed, and the photographic images were then printed to the optical part of the film strip, so that when played through a projector, the patterns would generate sounds. These same images were also printed onto the image part of the film, which meant you could simultaneously see the shapes that were generating the electronic sounds you could hear. On the version of Synchrony I'd seen, this was explained in a long detailed title card at the start of the film. Necessary, I suppose, because otherwise nobody would have really known that sound and image were linked in this way. The making of Synchrony was recorded in a documentary entitled "The Eye Hears, the Ear Sees," a catchy phrase that signals McLaren's interest in synesthetic sound-image relations, and which might also serve as a good tagline for the film. But if you took away the written word, if you took away that title card, what would the ear hear and what would the eye see? You'd be able to tell that changes in the image are accompanied by changes on the soundtrack, but you wouldn't understand the ontological connection between the two. You'd just be left with the experience, and what would you say about that? In the founding work of Semiology, the course in general linguistics, Ferdinand de Saussure stated, quote, "Whoever consciously deprives himself of the perceptible image of the written word runs the risk of perceiving only a shapeless and unmanageable mass. Taking away the written form is like depriving a beginning swimmer of his lifebelt." Running alongside and within the universe of language is a parallel universe, a parallel dimension of materiality, with ways of knowing sound, for example, and ways of registering sonic presences that have little or nothing to do with the attribution of linguistic meaning. Deprived of Saussure's lifebelt, how does one come to terms with concrete phenomena, events and objects? How does one come to terms with substance rather than form? How does one come to terms with the materiality of sound? And how does one engage with this materiality through language?
Speed writing, shorthand, speed dictation, number 1A. The first piece contains words with which you might not be familiar, but as I shall be dictating this letter very slowly, you should be able to write down the correct outlines. In any case, do not leave any blanks. Are you ready? Dear Mr. Gray, I want to take this opportunity to reply personally to your recent letter to our editor.
Part 2, Leftovers.
Lager, laborious, labyrinth, lacerate, lachrymose, lackadaisical,
A few years ago, friends lent
When I
me
write or
a
talk
copy
about a
of
film,
DVD,
any
Optical
film,
Sound
I
Films,
engage in an act of
1971,
translation.
2007.
When I write or talk about a film, in part I'm making an attempt to translate the material audiovisuality of cinema
Fascinating insight
according to the immaterial paradigms of language.
how they're structured.
If we're thinking about narrative or meaning, then language may do a good job.
legatee,
But what of those elements of the audiovisual experience that resist this form of translation?
Quote,
What of those elements of audiovisual experience that can't be neatly processed by language? Those Cinesonic elements and practices and relationships that don't necessarily make sense, but which can nevertheless be
optical sound
sensed.
film technology.
These often neglected dimensions of audiovisuality might be usefully formulated with Sarat Maharaj's notion of the untranslatable as the leftover of translation.
Printed down.
Maharaj says that when one language, one experience, one visual or retinal regime gets translated into another, it has to be rejigged to fit into the system of thinking of the other. And when this happens, something is inevitably left out. So how do you deal with these leftovers?
In this way,
As I said, when I write about the film or talk about a film, it might be relatively easy to explain the narrative or to discuss the meanings the film may convey.
when it was time to give
But what about all the other stuff that falls outside of meaning and narrative?
want to make it a legal
And what about those films that don't really operate in terms of meaning and narrative, like the film we saw earlier?
particularly worried about committing
When I write or talk about a film, there's a leftover that remains unaccounted for by the logic of language. Things like duration, the materiality of the image, or the materiality of sound.
explain what I was looking at.
But might there be a way of sharing something of the experience of the concrete materiality that seems central to the work of Guy Sherwin, for example? Perhaps this could be signalled not through what I say, but rather through what I don't say and the way I say it. In my attempts to talk about film and to talk about talking about film, I'm spinning a web of meanings that appears to contain or repress the material balance of translation. But since all signification, including my own speech, begins with a material manifestation, this isn't always so easily done. In Saussure's model of language, the materiality of the signifier simply evaporates in deference to meaning. And since meaning is a conceptual, abstract entity, it has no material dimension. But the materiality of the signifier never really evaporates, and its presence can never be completely repressed or excluded. This material other of language is sometimes sounded as noise in relation to meaning.
Arguably one of the best.
Sarat Maharaj suggests, quote, the remainder which cannot be put into words might be something you can visualise, or something that can be suggested through sonic stuff, through sounding of that difference, as a kind of turbulence, as a cloud of disturbance around clear-cut linguistic meaning.
The photographic images.
What this suggests to me is that not only can the materiality of sound disrupt the transmission of meaning, but also that the disruption of meaning might manifest the material.
These images
Materiality is sounded when meaning breaks down, when we can no longer hear exactly what I'm saying, when what I say stops making sense, when boredom relegates the flat tones of my East Midlands accent to an ambient drone, then the materiality of sonic experience becomes manifest. And in that moment of boredom, in the breakdown of meaning, we may glimpse or taste the materiality that proves so fugitive in language. The materiality that confronts us in the stark, simple power of Guy Sherwin's film.
In a way, your letter of criticism was a welcome one. Because you obviously care enough about our magazine to take the time
T
Part
O
3, Sound
zero
in Space.
zero zero.
Assurance Film demonstrates that film technology generates as well as reproduces sound. The importance of the conceptual shift from reproduction to generation articulated by these films shouldn't be underestimated, since this move radically challenges the dominant model of cinema as a medium of record and reproduction. The conception of the microphone as a mechanical equivalent of the ear helps to promote the idea that sound is a phenomenon external to the technology of film. It's out there, it needs to be captured. Even when sounds are edited and mixed, there is still a sense that they belong to a universe that's external to the machines in which they reside. External to the machines that bring them into being. That is, recorded sounds maintain an identity that marks them as external to the technology of film. In contrast, sounds internal to the technology of film are considered noise, and as such are usually seen as a threat to the fidelity of a recording. This particular model of film sound is, however, challenged by optical sound synthesis, in which sound is created by the inscription of marks or patterns rather than the transcription of vibrations. Many of the electronic sounds that are produced by drawing, painting or printing onto the optical soundtrack prove problematic in respect to cinema's dominant models of sound-image relationships. They are also proved problematic in the way in which sounds and sound-image relations relate to cinematic space. The electronic sounds produced by optical synthesis belong to neither pro-filmic nor narrative space, neither to the space in front of the camera nor to the fictive space of the narrative. Nor do these sounds belong to so-called non-diegetic space, the space of cinema's imaginary orchestra pit. Instead, these sounds emanate from the technology of projection itself. In 1932, a journalist wrote of the work of one of the pioneers of optical sound synthesis, quote, Rudolf Fenninger creates tones from nothing. What this journalist alluded to was the fact that optical synthesis produces sound that issues from a space that can't be registered in classical cinema, emerging as it does from the very apparatus that makes such an effort to erase its own presence, a ghost in the machine. Electronica produced by optical synthesis refuses to be inscribed into the dominant spaces of cinema. Instead, it is a sound that deterritorializes the spaces constructed and mapped by cinematic modes of representation. What we hear in Guy Sherwin's film then is sound that resists translation, which refuses to be equated with anything other than itself. Sound that serves neither the pro-filmic event nor its reconstructed image. In its concrete particularity, this sound presents a sonic materiality that finds no equivalent. It demands to be heard in the here and now, grabbing the listener by the ear rather than evaporating in the processes of signification, grabbing the listener by the ear rather than directing attention elsewhere. And in so doing, the sound of Sherwin's film trades the representational space of the photographic image and the recorded sound to the concrete space of its own exhibition.
In addition, your response MDR You did very well if you took down every word.
Part 4, Sound in Space.
A few years ago, a friend, since the introduction of optical sound,
surely one of the most important elements of Turing's work is the synesthetic effect generated by images that also create sound. But synesthetic sound relations has had a tough time in film criticism. Our editorial policy for 20 years has always been based on the belief that neither this publication nor any other magazine reporting on British culture can remain merely a news publication. Casting a long shadow over the discussion of audiovisual synchronization is the 1928 Statement on Sound, published by the Soviet directors Eisenstein, Panofsky and Alexandrov. We believe that we are required to adopt a viewpoint to compare and to criticize today's cultural accomplishments if we are to serve our readers' true interest. Here it is argued that sounding relations should be governed by a radical principle of montage, creating a social contrapuntal relationship between sound and image, a relationship in which sound simply illustrate or echo the image in a naturalistic manner.
Then I write about I like to talk enough to want to make it, even when the sound of it, but then I'd say there's still a sound meaning belong to you, not because I was particularly worried about external to the machine. It's more to do with, well, what about those who are going to record the sound and maintain an identity? It would take ages to fade it to the film tech. Would I really want the detail in that? I can't explain. So when I write and talk to the film, there's a method of the private supplement account answer, and I'm obviously worried about film fidelity, the material. I wouldn't get special model film sound because I understand the Chinese particle sound. This was the sound created by the film Jurassic Park. When I chose to worry to track out the book, I would lose the pleasure of experience. I need the electronic sound left and reading of the painting, of understanding sound. Might there be a way to share how the film space the dominant process of sound from seems central how the movie guys show and they also through problems I wouldn't go into sound and sound manipulation. Perhaps it would have central done. Not true what I say. Central to the operation has own manual then reminds me of a long space in my attempt to talk about subsequent sinister talk about creating and generating fictional stories and spinning out what it means appears there's quite a lot to contain. However, sound creates by film material using no source in the identity. It's all signification. These sounds belong to the filmmaking and material manifestation. Argue all the electronic sounds produced by the Norman seem to belong to such as model. These beautiful materiality assemblies one synchronous backward. Instead, these sounds emanate from the technology meaning as a central entity. Writing these cartoons, a journalist wrote of the work of pioneers and then presents quote from the film Rudolf Fenning. The materiality is when played through an optical sound projector. What this journalist has to press is the fact that never be completely repressed. These images were then also printed by this material other overlays, which may sometimes sound emerging noise from the generated electronic sound next year, as Sir Attenborough suggests. Now, the version I designed or distributed might be electronica visualised. This was explicitly fused with sound. Instead, necessary sound Turkish territorial. So no is really sound managed the making of the film suggests what we hear and gather only can materiality of sound transmission meaning which refuses to be equated to the catch up on the meter.
And is it not this unknowability, this untranslatability that points the way back to our experience of the cinematic event and to the materiality of film itself? Thank you.